Today we have the pleasure of having Douglas Lain joining us. He's a writer of number of award-winning books and award-nominated books, including Bash Bash Revolution and last week's Apocalypse. Sorry about the
Mhm.
pronunciation, which is a collection of short stories, and uh, uh, as well as publisher at Sublation Publishing, where Sublation Media, Sublation Magazine, and the Dietcast are managed, produced, and then published. He's also the former publishing manager at the Zero Books, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the books who watch
Mhm.
this show, probably.
Mhm.
And thank you for coming on. And just before really getting into it, I thought maybe you can tell us about your current projects, the Diet Soap podcast. I just watched your latest video. Fantastic.
Oh, did you watch the interview with Chris Catrone?
Yes.
Is that yes? So our most recent book that we've published is called "The Death of the Millennial Left," and it was written by Chris Catrone. It's a series of essays that he wrote over the last decade, and that summarize, I think, the period that the left went through from the ending of the 0 years, around 2006 or seven, so right before the economic crisis, and starting with the anti-war movement, and then through to the death of the Sanders movement, which is what the death of the millennial left is about. It's a series of interventions on the left. Probably the most controversial essay that he wrote that is included in the book was called "Why Not Trump?" And the essay is trying to convince his, universally left-wing students that they shouldn't panic as Trump heads into at the time he was likely to get the nomination for the Republican Party, and Chris Catrone thought he was likely to become the next president, and he was correct about that. So he's saying, despite how much hysteria there will inevitably be around Trump, socialists and leftists should step back and have a more clear-headed view and think about the history that has led to this moment, and particularly what was more significant than Trump was the death of neoliberalism, the crisis within American politics overall, and that Trump should be considered a symptom of that, as should the reaction to Trump from within the Democratic Party. So that's the most recent book that we've done. We are gearing up to do a number of other projects. We're going to start producing a line of audiobooks, so books that are not going to be printed or made into ebooks, but are going to be available only as audiobooks. A lot of our audience listens to the podcast, are interested in as interested in listening as they are in reading texts. And to be honest, I am someone who is as likely or more likely to read a full book if I listen to the whole book rather than if I sit down to read it. My eyes are going a little bit. I read a lot of PDFs, but so I myself will look up books on Amazon, and, like, let's say the latest Zizek book, and say, why isn't there an audiobook version? I could, go for a walk and listen to theory. And so we're going to be producing books along those lines, an audiobook line. We also are working on developing a feature-length movie. The working title at the moment is "Was Orwell an Optimist?" And that's taken from the critical theorist and philosophy teacher Rick Roderick, who did a great lecture series for the Teaching Company back in the 90s, and which is still popular on YouTube, and which
I've seen, yeah.
I occasionally will watch the old lectures again. And one line he says in one of his lectures is, "I think Orwell was a pie-eyed optimist, because a boot stamping on a human face forever assumes there's going to be human faces." So so we're working on that. And I've been the other thing that we're doing is I put out critical cuts videos where I make montage videos and create video essays. I just did one about deep fakes. I'm going to do one about the Slavoj Žižek's theory of ideology in the context of the current UFO flap. And after that, I'm hoping to do a video about gonzo journalism and Hunter S. Thompson and how we should approach the news. And then after that, I might do one about cyberpunk, return to that. Overall, I've been feeling as though my mission as a writer within Sublation, this is my one writing job, is to make these video essays, really, is to try to push against the left's censoriousness and authoritarian demeanor or culture, and remind them that, you know, the left used to be a dissident left, used to be in opposition to the establishment, and not simply trying to protect the establishment from the worst aspects in society. So that's what we're doing at Sublation.
That was great. You basically kind of referenced all my questions, so I don't know which one I should start. But before starting with my questions that I sent you, I just wanted to ask, you live in Portland, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is a docu-series Portlandia. I don't know if you've seen it. Is it
Mm-hmm.
how accurate is it to the actual experience of living in Portland? Because from what I understand, it's very accurate. That it's found footage almost.
I would say this, that it is, for being inaccurate, for being over the top and hyperbolic, it is more accurate than found footage would be. And I found that I can judge whether or not my fellow Portlanders are too self-serious based on their response to Portlandia. I recall watching the very first episode, being surprised by it, being struck by waves of nostalgia as I was watching it, and a feeling of like, when did it come out? It was like it was the late 0 years, right? It was around 2000.
I think so. Yeah,
It was
or
Bush.
early, or maybe very early 2011.
2011.
Right?
Okay. So yeah, it was during the Obama years, right? And it was this moment when I watched Portlandia, and they said, you know, the dream of the 90s is alive in Portland.
Yeah, that was quite shocking.
Yeah. And I had just turned 40. I'm 52 now. So I just turned 40 when that came out. And I had to accept that my youthful days of being Gen X in Portland were behind me when that show came out. Like, oh, yeah, oh yeah, the dream of the 90s. It's like the 90s are well over now. So yeah, I think it was a lot of fun, that show, and I think there was a lot of aspects to a lot of things about Portland that it captured. As it went on, I think it lost its way, but it's certainly, there's a lot of great footage of Portland in the show. So yeah, it captured something true about the city.
I mean, the jokes seem to come from a nice place as well. It didn't seem mean or anything. So yeah.
Right. No, but a few of my friends were like, I hate that show. They're getting it all wrong. And I'm like, you just don't like looking in the mirror. You can't take it. So.
Yeah, no, but so let me get on to the actual questions. And you recently, in a lot of your videos, talked about freedom of speech, which kind of you refer to right now as well, that you want to stop the censoriousness on the left. So I thought, if you want to tell us, why do you think it matters? Why do you think the Twitter file saga specifically matters? And if you don't mind, I might push back on that a bit.
Okay. Well, I do mind. No pushing back. I'll censor you if you try
to. Okay, sorry.
No. You can push back. Okay. So the Twitter files, why do they matter? I view the Twitter files in the context of the expansion of and the institutionalization of the war on terror, which after the September 11th attacks in New York, there was a response from the Bush administration to treat that event as constituting a national emergency, which justified the expansion of the security state and the granting of extensive powers to the federal government. Some of those powers included the right to surveil the public. The passage of the Patriot Act made it easier for the security state to get warrants to spy on both Americans and people from around the world. Internationally, they were spying. At the time, I opposed the Patriot Act, and I organized a protest against it where people went to the library. So it was adjacent to an anti-war protest. It was like, while the anti-war march was going on one street, a splinter group went off and went to the library. And our goal was to check out dangerous books, because if the federal government was going to be examining what books we checked out, which they were granting themselves the power to do, I wanted them to see that everyone in Portland, anyway, everyone at this library were reading all the wrong books, and everyone was dangerous. So like we checked out the Anarchist Cookbook and books by Karl Marx, and how to build a bomb, whatever we could find as close to that as we could.
Books by Karl Marx are considered dangerous still?
I didn't know. I didn't have an official list.
Oh,
so whatever I decided was a dangerous book, I just put on my list. Yeah. 1984 might have been on that list. Just anything that might. Sure, yeah. Because the other thing is, there is, of course, no list of books within the federal government that they've made public that you're not allowed to read that is considered dangerous, right? There's classified material, but no published, public domain or, out there in the market books, but they nonetheless wanted to know what we were reading. They still
didn't How to Blow a Pipeline. Didn't that get banned, I thought, or something
recently? But this was, 2000.
That's recent. Okay.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I don't know, but yeah. But the point is, like, there was nothing in the public library that was on any official list from the federal government. I mean, there are lots of books that had been banned by, states or municipalities that were in the public library, like, Catcher in the Rye might have been banned, or some at one
Scarlet Letter.
Yeah, things like that. But those weren't dangerous books. It really, when you're told by the federal government that they're going to be watching what you read, they're going to be assessing you based on what you read, it puts you in a pretty paranoid position. What am I allowed to read? What am I not allowed to read? So my thought was, well, we'll just read everything we think we're not allowed to read. And the point was just not really to mess with the government, but to get the idea out to people that it was not acceptable for the federal government to be examining or surveilling us based on our reading habits, that it was created a climate of a censorious climate to be surveilled in that way. And it was also a violation of our protection against illegal search and seizure. So that was the beginning for me. And I was against the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. I protested against both of those military adventures. And as things went along, I became more deeply committed to Marxism. But so today, as I see the release of these Twitter files, I see the same Department of Homeland Security that George W. Bush created in response to 9/11 has now granted itself the power to determine what should be allowed within the public discourse, whether it's online or when major media companies like the old legacy media companies, and what should not be allowed. And so they've institutionalized and created the technologies to surveil, monitor, and then attempt to censor all of the public speech on these social media platforms in particular. So all the major social media platforms are involved. They've created non-government organizations as cutout organizations to do some of the work. So for instance, the EIP, which stands for the Election Integrity Project, was formed in the words of its own director to fill the gaps for the Department of Homeland Security, that they're out of Stanford, so they had the ability to use machine learning to monitor and cull through tweets and Facebook posts and Instagram posts and whatever else, Truth Social, I guess, TikTok videos, YouTube videos. They had the computer know-how to be able to set up the programs to do the surveillance, and they did that for the Department of Homeland Security. And they also created portals of communication between the government and the different social media companies. So for me, what's happened is it's moved from surveillance to censorship. And this is important for people on the left to be concerned about, because socialists and leftists of many different types, anarchists, social democrats, they're all tasked with organizing politically within everyday society, and in order to seek political power and to challenge the current political powers. And if the current established political powers are going to censor both your private and public communications, that is going to put a major barrier up in terms of organizing an opposition. So that's the first reason why we should be concerned about it, just in practical terms. The other problem with it is that we won't be able to think as clearly if we don't have access to dissenting voices, if we don't have an open field of communication, but are only allowed to hear whatever is considered orthodoxy by the establishment through the Department of Homeland Security. So as an example, when it comes to the war in Ukraine, it is considered disinformation. The article written by Seymour Hersh that suggests that the United States government itself was responsible for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline is considered disinformation and is censored online through actually a Finnish fact-checking site, but that's clearly done in conjunction with the U.S. security state. And no true debate about U.S. policy and or what's actually happened around the Nord Stream pipeline can take place when the evidence for U.S. Involvement or U.S. responsibility is censored, is kept out of the debate. So and it's important to think about that particular example, because Seymour Hersh was the same journalist who exposed the My Lai massacre during Vietnam. It's the same journalist that wrote about Abu Ghraib during the occupation of Iraq. And he is a majorly important dissident journalist in America. He's a long history of standing up to the abuses of U.S. power, and for him to be chucked into the dustbin of history as a disinformation agent is a major defeat for the left in the United States. So those are some of the reasons why I think the Twitter files were so important. The other thing I'd say is it's not just the Twitter files, it's what I did was I read the Twitter files, and then I would look into the organizations that were mentioned in them, read their own documents. That includes reading the documents from the Department of Homeland Security on their intentions to create an apparatus to combat disinformation, and reading the reports that came out of the EIP, reading some publicly made documents from the EU and their new disinformation agencies, and sort of putting together a rudimentary picture of the expansive network of intelligence communities' efforts to censor and control information really throughout all of the NATO nations, and most especially for me within the United States. So there's my answer.
No, I just I should have before the show, by the way, said that I'm very, very stupid person. So
Oh,
Like I don't really even have a position, so I'm just asking questions. But
okay.
couple of things that comes to mind. One is that couldn't they already do all of those things, and we're doing all of those things anyway, sort of both surveillance and censorship, if it was necessary, like if it came down to it, so to speak, uh, even before this, like, that's,
Um, well, okay, I'll answer that as honestly as I can. So before the efforts were made to create these agencies and programs and to institutionalize the effort to control disinformation, there was, before the war on disinformation began, the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security and possibly the CIA had the ability, but definitely the FBI had the ability to censor and go after illegal speech online. So, for instance, if they were there was state secrets being traded, pushed around online, they had the ability to go after, discover who it was that was a leaker and prosecute them. If there was child pornography out on the internet, the FBI had the right to investigate and to find out who was responsible and prosecute. If there was fraud online, the FBI and other agencies had the ability to pursue investigations and to prosecute. The difference here is that what's called disinformation is not illegal speech. It is, under the First Amendment, legally protected speech. So what's happening now is that there's through this private public partnership, there's an attempt being made to basically curate all of the information that we're receiving in the West, which is not the same thing as enforcing the law. In fact, it is in violation of the law, as I understand. And I think if it was taken to court, it would, it's always iffy, but the Constitution and the decisions that have been made in the past by the Supreme Court around speech, I think would, as well as decisions made around what's called entwinement, where a private company becomes a state actor because they're entwined with the state. I think all of these things would lead to victory for people who brought this to courts. At least it should. So that's the first thing I'd say. And the second thing I'd say is, while it's true that if an FBI agent decided to target someone for censorship, say, they probably could find a mechanism to target an individual or an individual group, to censor them or to harass them. And that's been going on for a long, long time. The difference is that is that they're not attempting to, in a piecemeal, sporadic way, go after this organization or that organization. This is an attempt to curate information on what they call a whole society level. And so that they both mean that it's going to take cooperation with the whole society. Like, you should report your neighbor if they say something you think is disinformation. And also, it's aimed at controlling information within the whole of society. So those are the things that make it different. It's like the difference between the kind of surveillance that was going on before 9/11 and the kind of surveillance that was going on after 9/11. The other thing is that the history of democracy in the United States has always been the history of the state granting itself far too much authority and suppressing the public, and then the history of the public fighting back, gaining ground, winning new freedoms, constraining the state. In response to COINTELPRO, there was a church committee, and they put some constraints on what the FBI could do, and those were largely undone after 9/11 and continued to be undone. So yeah, is that a good answer to your question?
Yeah, sure. I just meant that, don't you think that it's just inevitable that whenever something becomes a threat, the state is going to respond? So if this is a threat, that's one thing. Secondly, don't you think these are futile attempts at control, considering the media landscape has become completely international? For example, I followed the, Seymour Hersh Ukraine thing, and I couldn't find anybody who was, buying the, mainstream, so to speak, narrative, because it's just, there are so many news channels out there, many of them not American, or, what I like, that type of thing. So I'm just saying, isn't it too, it's kind of like Islamic Republic tries to do the same, but it's just, it's, what do they say, the horse has left the stable or something. It's just too late, it's.
Well, okay. I think that, okay, the second thing is an interesting point, but I don't, all right. So the first, what was, remind me what the first part of that, because the second part was, aren't they going to fail to censor despite all their best efforts? Is your kind of.
Oh, the first one was that, isn't it sort of inevitable that regulatory bodies catch up with whatever, it's
yeah,
like.
right. If it's a threat, right.
Yeah.
Well, the in the United States, the First Amendment makes it clear that that speech is not a threat in and of itself. That the principle at work when it comes to understanding free speech in the United States is that it operates on John Stuart Mill's harm principle, which is that all speech should be free, excepting the speech that can be shown to directly cause harm in physical, violent terms. So, like, for instance, in the United States, if I say we should drag all the politicians out of Washington, D.C. and shoot them all in the head, that is legally protected speech. That does not violate the harm principle, because I'm talking about a concept, a political concept, it's an indirect call for violence. It's not a direct one. It's, if I was at the January 6th riots and I said, we should go in, Mike Pence is in there, we should go in, drag him out and hang him, then
And you should have said that, but you.
no, I wasn't there, and I would never have said that. Then that would constitute illegal speech. So the idea that information and free expression of ideas and opinions is a threat to the government is something that I reject. That, and the other thing is that the public has the right to challenge and oppose the political order. The political order is there for the public. The public is not there for the political order. So that's kind of foundational ideas of democratic American society, even if you're right or left. And so I reject the idea that the state has the right to claim that speech is a threat, or that it should protect its interests against the public. And so that's the first thing I'd say to that. Go ahead.
No, I didn't mean it in a, like they are morally right. I meant it's inevitable. Like there is no way to stop it.
Well,
not that.
I don't see, like, if you think that it, I mean, I think that the history of struggle for democracy and for freedom and for basic rights has shown that there are plenty of ways in which the public can stop and constrain the state. Even when it doesn't appear that we're absolutely successful, there are instances where it does occur that the state has to respond to the will of the public. Just recently, the Disinformation Governance Board, which was started up within the Department of Homeland Security, was shuttered because the public reaction to it was so overwhelmingly negative, and it was such a liability politically for the Biden administration that they had to shut it down. Same thing happened with in the Bush era when they created the Office for Total Information Awareness with the big Orwellian pyramid with the eye in the pyramid scanning the globe as its logo. People are like, what
That was on
the hell are you
purpose.
doing? So the public does have some power, and we can slow down or constrain or even reverse the powers of the state. That is possible. All is not hopeless. But to really put an end to the abuses of both the big capitalist companies and the state working together, there would have to be a working class political movement for more radical change than simply trying to protect the rights that we have. And but in order to do that, we still need to protect our rights. The question about, well, will they really succeed? I mean, I think it's possible that a movement for radical transformative change could take place under the watch of a truly dictatorial, censorious, authoritarian power. You could actually organize within a society where, let's say, you don't have the right to associate. And when you go out into the street in groups of more than 3 or 4 people, you're just busted up and dragged off to jail. It's possible that even under those conditions, truth gets out, there's a black market of ideas, people meet in secret, but it's much easier to organize politically when you don't have to worry about your head being smashed in when you show up with 4 or 5 people on the street. And given that we're not there yet in the United States, I think we should make an effort to protect ourselves from that possibility.
But not just talking about the United States now, just globally, this kind of segue well to my question about your perhaps science fiction taste and all that as well. That you tend to very much agree with you. I mean, living in Iran, freedom of speech is, the little pleasures you can get and all that. But then things happen, like, they pretty much kill Jeffrey Epstein in daylight, and everybody knows about it, and they broadcast it. And then, I don't know, Bill Clinton is a, pedophile, and among many others, blah, blah, blah. And nobody does anything, and nobody really cares about anything. And then you wonder if it's a Brave New World situation where actually maybe it's when your head is not getting smashed, maybe that's when.
Okay. Well, with Jeffrey Epstein, what do we really know? We know that he died in prison, and that the guards were negligent, right? And that they turned off the cameras. We know that, right? And yeah, and so it looks very likely that he was murdered. Yeah, right. But okay, here's the problem with Jeffrey Epstein.
Or many corruption cases of Congress or blah, or,
Right. Well, here's the thing. Like, Jeffrey Epstein is a really weird and interesting example, because he gathered almost every major political and intellectual figure in America around him. Even Noam Chomsky. Yeah. Right. So everyone's implicated, and within the current political structure in the United States, particularly, it's not within anyone's interest to really expose all of what that meant to light. There's no organized political force that isn't tainted by Jeffrey Epstein in the United States. So there,
the Green Party has Howdy Mandela.
I don't. I don't know. Maybe the Green Party is exempt, but I doubt it. Given
given
that Noam Chomsky was buddies with Epstein. I just don't think there's anyone. The libertarians probably aren't free and clear.
Oh, they
You know,
definitely had. Yeah.
I mean, I can say that Sublation Media has no connections to Jeffrey Epstein that I'm aware of. Okay.
You haven't published Chomsky?
Well, look, at Zero Books, I don't know, but at Sublation, the 3 titles we put out so far, none of them are connected to Jeffrey Epstein directly. Although Norman Finkelstein's friends with Noam Chomsky. So there's one degree of separation between
Norman, you're right.
and Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah. We interviewed Norman Finkelstein too, so I guess we are all kind of
So you're not any better off.
No.
So obviously what this means is that there needs to be an organized effort to create a political party and political movement within the United States and within the West and around the world that is not in any way attempting to win a victory for one or the other side of the established political system. Like, we need to develop an independent political movement that isn't going to be corrupted in this way. But at the moment, everyday people in the United States, they don't see their options being, oh yeah, I'm going to join up with a political force that is in opposition to this. They see their options being, I'm going to join up with this aspect of the political force that's connected to Jeffrey Epstein, rather than this aspect of the political establishment that's connected to Jeffrey Epstein.
At least he's financially connected. They're not sexually connected.
Right. I mean, I'm not claiming that everyone who was friendly with or had some sort of business relationship with or personal relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was flying out to his island to diddle 14-year-olds. I'm just saying that everyone is connected. Everyone in every political faction has someone who's associating with Epstein in the background. Certainly the Democratic Party does. Lots and lots of them. Bill Clinton being one. Valerie Plaskett, the so-called member of Congress who
what is her position? Do you understand?
She is a non-voting member of Congress.
Can people just show up and go to
She's
Congress?
From the Virgin Islands, so she was elected, but the Virgin Islands is not a state, so she can't vote.
I was thinking of showing up and
yeah, you can
giving
my opinion, to get elected.
My opinion.
I'm also a non-voting member. I'm not actually a member of Congress, so I also, like Plaskett, can't vote in the Congress. But unlike her, I don't get to sit there and talk either. But Plaskett, she was one of the people who went after Matt Taibbi. She said she was going to lock him up for plagiarism after his testimony, even though everything he said was in substance true. Anyway, so people don't have an option to join something that's already in motion to resist. So then what are they going to do with this information when there is no political movement or political party that is attempting to resist or overturn the corrupt system? I mean, the people who are mad about Jeffrey Epstein, really mad about it, probably are most likely going to vote for Trump in the next election, because he represents mythically, in the imagination, the anti-corruption movement. But I mean, he also was buddies with Epstein and flew on his jet, and and his background, I would guess there's a 50-50 chance he went to the island. That would be my
I think 100% he went to the island.
Did he go for sure? Okay.
I don't know. I think so, but 50-50 is for, I think, whether he did something substantially illegal or not, I guess.
Right, that's what I'm saying. When I say go to the island, that's a euphemism.
That's
okay.
I see.
That's a euphemism. Right. So anyway, so that's my answer to that. But nonetheless, I think it's important to be able to know about this corruption. I think it does create the opportunity for something to come together to oppose it. And I want what comes together to be a socialist party that will work to empower working class people and work in their interests. Not because I'm some great, charitable, generous, moral person, but because I think that the working class has the most potential to really radically change things. And I think the world would be a lot more interesting, better if the people who made the world were in charge of running it. So that's my position on that. So what's the next thing? Let's who else?
No, no,
What
no.
other
It's
horrible
just
story like the Jeffrey Epstein thing? God, so disturbing. So disturbing. Go ahead.
it is. I have to say, when you said the misinformation board died, that was tragic for us, because that lady, the Mary Poppins lady, was just Linda, whatever.
Oh yeah.
I forget her name, but yeah, she was
Jankowicz
great.
was
She
her.
was Jankowicz. Jankowicz. Yeah,
Jankowicz. Yeah.
she was,
Yeah.
she was fantastic. But I didn't put this in the questions, but I thought, just talking of politics now and movements, what are you thinking about the upcoming U.S. presidential elections? Are you more on the Green Party because of the Cornel West, perhaps? Are you impressed by RFK push-ups or not?
I am
Uh,
impressed by RFK's ability to push up. The man is jacked. He is swole.
I feel there's a bit of a steroid or something. I don't
Oh,
know.
probably. But nonetheless, impressive. And
Yes.
I'm not on board with voting for RFK. He's running as a Democrat. I'm just not going to be supporting any Democrats going forward. Cornel West, the fact that he's running as an independent, not within the Democratic Party, as a spoiler, I endorse that. I think the Democrats need to be punished right now. But having said that, when I look at the potential outcomes for the next presidential election, none of them are good. Like, none of them are anything but kind of frightening. So then you have to say, okay, which frightening outcome would be best for a socialist project? And I haven't really weighed all the options, but here's what I see. It's either, let's say, the best of all possible worlds for the establishment. DeSantis wins the nomination, not Trump. And
Oh,
it's
that's okay. That's good. Is that still
that,
on the cards, DeSantis?
yeah, and I don't think it is, but that's still
Mm.
technically possible, right? So then what do we get? Well, we either get 4 more years of Biden, or we get DeSantis, and we continue to see the same expansion of authoritarian powers within the federal government. We get a Republican Party, which, with its populist wing at least partially subdued, and we get, a return to normal, which will be bad politically for any kind of oppositional politics. But it might seem like it's the best possibility because it won't be so, intensely frightening every day if that happens, especially for relatively educated, relatively affluent people on the left. That would be the best of all possible worlds. The worst of all possible worlds. Donald Trump gets a nomination. Donald Trump gets locked up in prison. Donald Trump wins the presidency.
Oh, that
That's a
would be
major constitutional crisis, I think. I don't know what would happen at that point. I don't know how the Democratic Party would respond. I imagine they would be quite alarmed and hysterical, and I think that there would be a major crackdown on all dissent within the United States, much more explicitly
you.
than there had been in the past. They would use whatever protests and opposition arose out of that moment to justify a more evident and present police state, I think. Not necessarily full on every day you have to show your ID as you walk out onto the corner, but something more substantial even than what we're seeing now. So that's the worst case scenario, but that might not, as you pointed out earlier, it might not be absolutely the worst, because then, if it was much more obvious that the reaction to the election was creating conditions which were oppressive for almost everybody who wasn't, a member of the Jeffrey Epstein club, then the possibilities for political organizing on the left might be better. But I worry that instead of that, what we'll see is a majority of people who coming out of the Bernie Sanders campaign and the organs of the left that have developed over the last 10 to 15 years would simply line up behind the Democrats and the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security against the fascists who would be protesting against it, because they would be anti-Trump, and I'm anti-Trump, but they would be anti-Trump and therefore unable to
That's
see.
like minimum, I think, being
But
anti-Trump.
I have to be
Just-
anti-Trump. If I'm not
it's
anti-Trump,
just
I get
so too
dragged
easy.
from my. I don't like Trump. He's kind of a
Well,
jerk. I prefer
Yeah,
him
well-
on TV and not in politics.
Yeah,
But yeah, no, but I am anti-Trump. But just like I'm anti-Biden, it's not different. So,
Mhm.
but anyhow, I worry that the left would not take advantage of that, or see the connect the working class through that moment. That's what would need to happen. So those are the two options I see possible. And then somewhere in the middle is like, Trump wins the nomination, wins the presidency, but he gets to be president and isn't put in prison. Or Trump wins the nomination, loses to Biden, and most of the public thinks that the fix was in again. And then there's still, you have more unrest within the Republican Party and within a good portion of the independent voters as well. So those are the four options, I guess, that I see possible. I mean, maybe Kamala Harris gets to be president.
Exactly. Biden dies, Kamala becomes president, and Veep becomes reality. So that's
that'd be great.
another option.
I would so enjoy that. I could cancel my Netflix subscriptions and just watch the news because it would be just as entertaining. Anyway.
They should make a documentary series about just Kamala's team and how I think they give her drugs or something. She doesn't seem healthy.
No, I think she's self-medicating with the white wine. That would be my guess.
Yeah.
Do you think she's on something harder than that? I don't know.
Some of the things she does, it's really weird. It's almost like she's on LSD or something.
Yeah.
The laughter,
Yeah, she's from this sort of milieu where her behavior is only considered eccentric rather than absolutely bizarre. That's what I would say. She's like taken on the eccentricity of her milieu, but it just isn't quite staying within the parameters all the time. Yeah.
Fair
so
enough.
yeah.
Yeah. Just before you go, because I don't think I have you for much longer. I just want to ask you about your own science fiction writing and your other books, and what kind of science fiction books are you into? Are you more of a 1984 or a Brave New World? I mean, that's a cliche, but
I think both those books are. I mean, for the longest time, I thought Brave New World was probably more accurate than 1984, but now I'm sort of back, and because I'm having my old conservative turn as I get to be in my 50s and so. No, it really is like 1984. But neither option is particularly good, right? Brave New World is hardly. It's also a dystopian novel. I've read 1984 a whole bunch of times, and I've read Brave New World once, so I should read it again. Yeah, my favorite science. I'm not keeping up with contemporary science fiction. I stopped reading my, my contemporaries within my own milieu around 2010. It's like when I started podcasting. I stopped going to science fiction conventions. I got very interested in politics. What happens? I was creating a magazine called Diet Soap that was going to have fiction and nonfiction in it, and it did for a while, but it got shuttered because it was not selling that well. And the podcast, which I started up to promote that magazine, was more successful than the magazine is. Yeah. And I also found that I would interview other science fiction writers and I would find them boring. But when I would interview left-wing journalists and philosophers and academics, I found them really interesting. So I didn't really want to hear another writer tell me how they came up with their ideas or what their latest story was. I was like, I like it when I talk about those things about my own work, but I don't like hearing about your work. that's just petty jealousy. Um,
Rival.
yeah, but so I
Sci-fi
don't read. Go ahead.
sci-fi fiction writers famously have really like weird eccentricities. So I am surprised a bit because from what I know from the old ones, H.G. Wells was a socialist, wasn't he? Like,
Yes, he was. He was a kind of socialist. He was a kind of a technocrat. He was
yeah, yeah,
not he was not a Marxist by any means. He was like a Fabian type, although he
yeah.
was a critic of the Fabians. Um, no, I've been reading The Outsider recently. Colin Wilson's The Outsider. You know that book? It was
Sounds
he
very
was one of the
familiar.
angry. It's in 1950s, I think, or early 60s. Colin Wilson wrote a book called The Outsider, and
Is it?
it was a nonfiction book, a kind of a survey of Western literature and thought. And there's a section on H.G. Wells, which is compelling reading. He was considered one of the angry young men, Colin Wilson, for this book. And after that book, so he had high literary acclaim.
You mentioned it in one of your videos. That's how I know about it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Colin what?
Colin Wilson. People used to, back in the 90s, sometimes confuse him for Robert Anton Wilson because their books were shelved near each other in the head shops and things like that. And Colin Wilson, after he wrote The Outsider, I believe is the name of the book, he wrote a whole bunch of other books, which he kind of veered off into the occult and UFOs, and like he became
Yeah, I
very
tell you,
interested in
the science
Lovecraft.
writers, they tend to go quite eccentric sometimes.
Yeah, they do. And my favorite science fiction writer of all time was certainly eccentric. He was it was Philip K. Dick, who
Yeah. You got
who
nominated for the award, right?
Philip K. Dick Award. I got nominated for that. And yeah, and he was eccentric. He believed that God had sent him a vision in the form of a pink laser beam, and that he had seen that the Holy Roman Empire had never ended, and that the time, all of the 20th century and all of time since then had been an illusion, and that he was really a Roman, or possibly it was a Soviet satellite that beamed disinformation into his head, or possibly he wrote a book called Valis, which is super cool, very interesting, fun read, where the main character is basically him, and he's trying to come to terms with the mystical experience that he's had while he's living in uh, Berkeley, California, and talking to his hippie friends and who are dropping acid and smoking pot. And a more contemporary writer who I like a lot that I'd recommend is Jonathan Lethem, but I particularly like a book that no one really talks about that he wrote called Amnesia Moon. It's kind of very Philip K. Dickian and alternative universe and reality falling apart type of book.
Uh, Full disclosure, I only read the what is the one that Blade Runner is based on? Why do ships
why do androids dream,
dream?
or do androids dream of electric sheep?
Yeah,
Yes.
sorry about that.
Yeah.
But I couldn't. I mean, I may have been too young, but I couldn't really connect with it at all. I didn't get it. So
Well,
I
I
mean, that was
first read
mine.
Philip K. Dick when I was at Eckerd College in Florida in like 1990, and I was in a film and literature class, and we were watching him. We'd watch them. We'd read the book, and then we'd watch the movie version, right? So, like, I remember two books that we read in that class. Oh no, there's three. There was The Graduate, who read the book, and then we watched the
Oh,
movie, The Graduate.
there's a book of The Graduate.
Yeah, it was based on a book. Yeah,
I had no idea.
and then The Unbearable Lightness of Being, which we watched, which is a better book than it is a movie. Whereas The Graduate is a better movie than it is a book. And then Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep was one, and then we watched Blade Runner. I, at the time, thought Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, especially after having just read The Unbearable Lightness of Being, which is kind of high literary fiction. I thought it was trash. Do Androids Dream, poorly written, confusing, kind of
Yes, confused.
unsophisticated, whereas the movie was much, much better. But then after I dropped out of Eckerd College, moved to Portland and smoked a little pot, I came across Philip K. Dick again, and I read Ubik, and I read The Man in the High Castle, and there was one, Time Out of Joint, which is a really good Philip K. Dick novel, and I read Valis. Valis was hugely important, and I realized, oh, this is a major philosophical writer who's writing in the science fiction form from the pulp days and should be reconsidered. I don't think Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is his best book, but it's much better than I originally thought when I was 19 and at Eckerd College. So anyway.
Yeah, I should give it a try. I tried that Wallace, or am I saying it right? That sounds nice. That's
VALIS, Valis, and it stands for
Valis.
Vast Active Living Intelligence System. That's
Oh,
what
okay.
Valis stands for. It's like, I think one of the ways in which Philip K. Dick's doppelganger in the novel describes God, which is as a vast, active, living intelligence system. So
sounds like something a Spinoza would like. But
yeah.
I just before you go, just I thought I add this funny question if you have time. But it's 1984. I was wondering why do everybody loves it, and why is it a great book? I personally really don't like it.
Don't like it.
I felt a bit naive, to be honest, and the language is not particularly sophisticated either, I think. But
okay, well, it's been a while since I've actually read the book, but I'll just tell you my history with the book, and then to justify my particular admiration for it. I read 1984 when I was in junior high in the year 1984. So that was when I read 1984 for the first time.
That is the best probably experience for that book.
Right. And so Ronald Reagan was president, and I read 1984, and I read it through my lens of hatred for Ronald Reagan, and also my dislike of my teachers in junior high, and feeling like I didn't like public school very much, and I was put upon and oppressed. And also, I read it at a time when I was going through puberty and having trouble with girls, and the misogyny in the book spoke to me probably as well. So
okay, yeah. Forgot about that, to be honest.
Yeah. So I mean, that's not to really advocate for the book, but it resonated with me, as I couldn't get a girl to go to the dances with me and things like that. But it does depict a lot of it does depict the way authoritarian systems function at their core. If you strip away all the niceties of it, I mean, it is clearly hyperbolic. In reality, when the Nazis occupied France, they didn't tell people they couldn't keep a diary, and they didn't keep them from going out and associating in public. They didn't, regular everyday life looked the same under Nazi occupation as it did before. So there's photographs of, young French people sitting in cafes with stylish clothes on and, enjoying wine or coffee in the afternoon, while they're like SS officers in the background, right? So the reality is it was hyperbolic, but the cartoon version he drew does point to some of the logic of authoritarianism, I think, and the importance of being able to think critically is illustrated, and also the limits of the human body and mind are explored as well. But like, I think it's important, like for today, there's this old, but for the left, I think in order to be on the left today, you have to demonstrate in some way that you could pass what was called, I think it was called the Ash conformity test. But there's this psychological experiment where they would sit one person down who was actually the test subject and a group of other people who, and they're all participating in the experiment, and they would be asked to point to the shortest line on a piece of paper with 4 or 5 lines drawn on it. And everyone else in the group would in various ways point to the wrong lines. And the test was to see if the test subject would conform with the group and also point to the wrong line, or would stand firm in
So they're
his or her
plants.
belief. Yeah, everyone else is plants, and there's one test subject. And what they found was many, like, I don't remember the percentages, but a majority of people would go along with the group, even when the correct answer was very clear. Even when it was very clear that everyone else in the group was pointing to actually the shortest line rather than the longest, or vice versa, they would go along with the group. And I think you have to be the kind of test subject who would point to the actual shortest line or the actual longest line, depending on what they're asking you for, rather than go along with the group. And I think that one of the things that comes out of reading 1984 is it romanticizes the individual who would stand up against the groupthink and be able to insist upon the kind of bare fact that 2 + 2 = 4, and that their own mind is the foundation for struggle and for their life. And so that's what's good about 1984.
No, thank you. As I mentioned, I'm very stupid, so it's nothing on the book. It's just
I see through that pose. I know that move. I've used that one for years. I don't know anything. You're the expert. This is Socrates' move. I don't know anything. Sure. You please explain it to me. Yeah.
No. But I meant to say, I think you're 100%. I think it's just his hyperbolic and cartoonish way of putting things, to me, hides how insidious, and like with the Islamic Republic, you don't feel the pain or with any authoritarian regime, I don't think you don't feel the pain as much as you are just warned by it or something. So, but I agree with you that it's probably a great book. It's just not to my
It's not
taste.
the only book. It's not like if you want to understand how to resist authoritarianism, you read 1984 and you've got everything. It's not a bad book for when you're 13 years old in the year 1984 and you want to stand up against Ronald Reagan.
That was perfect. Yeah, that was Reagan is president. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, right. All right.
Thank you so much for giving us your time, and I hope to talk to you soon if you have time.
Yeah, I'd love to come back. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
I love your Socratic questions and the way your faux pose of ignorance. I thought that was brilliant.
You broke the fourth wall. Now everybody knows it's good. I'm a genius.
Right. Yeah, I know. All right.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.